On to other things. We just finished a legislative session. Want to thank all of you for your work covering the ins and outs of the session. Very excited. We had a really historic success this session. 95% of the bills that reached my desk were bipartisan. We signed a total of 454 bills, 5 vetoes, 1 bill that didn't need signing. We also had 42 bill signing events across the state, including the final ones yesterday on the banks of the Arkansas River and in our Nevada fire station. So we really got to celebrate a lot of the bipartisan achievements of this session with the Republican and Democratic sponsors. First and foremost, of course, we got full-day kindergarten done. It begins this fall. Parents are excited across the state. Districts are rolling out their full-day kindergarten programs, and parents who deposited money are getting it back. Parents who couldn't afford it now will be able to have their kids attend full-day kindergarten anywhere in our state. As you know, there's going to be a significant addition in preschool as well. In addition to the 5,100 e-care slots that can now be used for preschool, many districts on their own that had subsidized kindergarten will be deciding where to put some of that money. Some are investing in early childhood. Some are also raising teacher pay, reducing class size as they are finally backfilled for the full-day kindergarten commitment they already made. Districts like Greeley, Pueblo, and Mapleton and Westminster and a few others. The major districts, Jefferson, Denver, the big districts had been charging, of course. Healthcare, we rolled out our roadmap to lower healthcare costs, and I'm proud to say we achieved the goals that we set out in the roadmap during the legislative session. We really got what we needed to done with the legislative authority. We still have a lot of work to do to actually implement the bills successfully. And we've begun that work with reinsurance. I'm proud to say that we got every member of our congressional delegation to sign our waiver request for reinsurance. That's not always easy to get, Ken Buck and Joe Neguse, to get Cory Gardner and Michael Bennett and Ed Perlmutter and Doug Lamborn. But it's because it's really a common sense, bipartisan solution that's worked in other states, will work here. Many of you followed the changes that were made during the legislative session to maximize the chances of a federal waiver, which were, again, with the strong supporting of our Republicans and Democrats in our delegation, strongly optimistic about. We expect that depending on where you live in our state, reinsurance will bring down rates somewhere in the 15 to 25% range, brings down rates more in the higher cost areas of our state, generally western Colorado, but will be significant savings for Front Range residents as well, depending on, again, the different pricing zones in that 12-15% range, which we're very excited about as well. We also ended surprise out-of-network billing. We capped the out-of-pocket cost of insulin. We required hospital pricing transparency. We improved access to behavioral health. We are also piloting a drug importation program that we are currently working on and hope to get federal approval for. We also expand the scope of practice for emergency medical services. But passing these bills is really just the first step. We have a lot of work on implementation, and we are, while we have been granted many of the programs and legal changes and authority that we sought to save people money on health care, there's a lot of work we're doing at HCPUF and Division of Insurance and CDPHE to make sure that we can recognize these savings for Coloradans, so that Coloradans have to spend less on health care and can spend more of their hard-earned money enjoying the Colorado that we love. Those are some of the big issues that we worked on, and we want to be happy to answer any questions you have.
Governor, last week, the governor of Utah held his annual energy summit, and they signed a memorandum of understanding on natural gas development and the Jordan Cove pipeline. Now, your office didn't send anybody. Is that a signal to your position on natural gas?
Well, I was just told by my staff that we were not invited to the conference, as far as we know. We are, again, very supportive. The Colorado Energy Office is supportive of our renewable energy transition. We completely recognize that we are also producers of fossil fuels, and we are working on the implementation of Senate Bill 181, as you know, to provide a more stable environment for operators and putting health and safety first with regard to extraction activities in our state.
But how do you feel about natural gas?
We produce some and we sell some, and depending on the price of natural gas, that's what dictates those opportunities. And the prices have been a little bit lower lately. So those, but again, it depends on commodities pricing. We've been neutral on Jordan Cove. Again, it's a project that Oregon is sort of front and central for where the support and opposition is, and if it moves forward, we'll be happy to work with the companies involved with the relatively small part of the work in Colorado. If it doesn't move forward, again, we're certainly working to diversify our economy across our state, because when we rely on commodity-based pricing for our economic welfare, we're putting our own families at risk of international pricing forces that are beyond our control. So again, of course, we've had good times with regard to commodities-based pricing and good jobs, but they disappear just as fast when the price goes down. And while, of course, we're always hopeful that any project will create good jobs in Colorado, we also want to make sure we have the economic diversity to withstand any downturn in commodity prices.
Governor, what do you say to the 15,000 students at Metro State who are not getting that tuition freeze? Most of whom are Hispanic and people of color and low income.
Just that I wish they did, and I've certainly let the administration there know that as well. But every other public university in our state froze tuition, and the legislature was aware of what Metro was planning to do during that process.
Governor, how would you describe your role or how you viewed it with all this legislation moving through the second floor?
Well, again, we were very focused on saving people money on health care and full-day kindergarten and expanding early childhood education. There's 100 legislators with at least 5 ideas each, often more. And so we often have to react about how those ideas, which always, come from a legitimate place of them listening to constituents, but how they affect other laws, how much they cost, how realistic they are in terms of us implementing them. So we were always engaged in providing feedback to legislators about their various ideas. And I think, again, it's testimony to both the work of the legislators and the input we provided that 454 bills were signed and that 95% of them were bipartisan.
You signed a handful of climate bills last week out in Nevada and said that you would need more executive action to complete the process. What do you have in mind? I know you haven't done them yet, but what's the ballpark of ideas you're considering? What do you think we need to do more from your office?
Well, there's a lot happening on to clean our air and create good green jobs that can never be outsourced. And it was more than even just those 9 or I think 11 bills that we signed that day. We signed some electric vehicle bills the next day, but it's also about conservation. It's about preserving our public lands, which are an important part of carbon sequestration and maintaining healthy ecosystems. It's about the future of agriculture and helping the next generation of farmers have sustainable practices with regard to soil and climate. It's about making sure that our farmers are positioned to benefit from the renewable energy economy with the siting of solar and wind on their properties. So there's a lot going on in that space. We'd never really viewed air quality or climate as a siloed issue. We have a climate cabinet that operates across a number of our different agencies, as you said, working on what we can do with our executive authority in this area to both implement and build upon the historic accomplishments of the last legislative session. Again, I would highlight our very first executive action, significant as executive action, was the electric vehicle standards, increasing the number of electric vehicles available to Colorado consumers, and it'll certainly be an area that we continue to highlight through our executive actions.
Governor, what's your message to agriculture when you're telling them build solar on your farm instead of farming?
Well, I don't think it's instead of farming. I mean, when I hear from most farmers that I visit with, usually that's where they cite solar is usually the unproductive or less productive part of their land. But it's also a way to round out, again, the commodities-based economy that farmers deal with year in and year out. And it provides a more, just as oil and gas and solar provide a more predictable revenue source that can counter some of the commodity price fluctuations that affect their main crops.
Governor, you vetoed a couple of bills that would have added regulations to certain professions. You didn't veto bills that businesses said would burden them more, like the Pay Equity Act, minimum wage, local hike. Can you just talk about your mindset and kind of what you saw as acceptable regulations and what were non-acceptable regulations to businesses?
Well, women should be paid the same amount for equal work for equal pay. It's about time that Colorado recognized that in law. And from a civil rights perspective, our economy benefits when the value that women make to the workforce is appreciated the same as men. I support local control in a variety of things. We did this was a great session for local control, whether it was oil and gas, whether it was smoking regulations, whether it was minimum wage. We've moved towards empowering our innovators, our problem solvers on the ground level in communities to adapt the best laws that reflect the economic interests of their own communities.
We can talk about the ones you vetoed and why those were on.
Well, those were not local control bills. Those were statewide licensure requirements that risked limiting choice for consumers, driving up costs, whether it was driving up HOA fees at a time when housing is already a major concern for many Coloradans. In a very innovative area, genetic counseling, where we side with innovation and access. And then, of course, the failure to demonstrate a real need around the sports licensing one, which is a very, very limited use for the state.
When you make the apply, did you get a hand cramp signing all those bills?
Well, 454 bills, as I said, 42 signing ceremonies all over the state. I was in Salida yesterday with Representative Jim Wilson and Senator Donovan and Representative Roberts and Representative McCluskey. Really a great opportunity to celebrate the successes of the Republicans and the Democrats in our legislature, reacting to ideas that they heard about from constituents and doing their job in building bipartisan legislation to solve real problems.
More serious note. Here's an open-ended question. What's next? You had a great first start when you started. What's next?
Well, again, my agenda remains the same, and it's really all work in progress. We want to save people money on their living costs, healthcare being a big one. Whether it's housing, healthcare, all of those big ticket items. There's a lot of additional work on implementing full day kindergarten and towards expanding preschool options and early childhood options for Colorado families to allow them to raise their families here and thrive. We have a lot more work to accomplish our healthcare roadmap on the implementation side. The legislative piece might be done, but our work has largely just begun at HCPF and Division of Insurance and CDPHE to actually recognize these savings for Colorado consumers. So there's a lot of work in the months ahead, and I'm very involved with our agency directors and others in making sure that we deliver on the promise of these policies. On tax reform, we passed two big tax cuts this last session. One gave a major tax cut to 144,000 small businesses in the vendor fee tax cut, or Main Street tax cut. Every retailer with sales under $12 million got a significant tax cut. And I want to point out how significant that tax cut is. So if you take a store, typical store, it might have sales of, let's say, $1 million a year. That would be a reasonably successful store. The owner of that store might only make $50,000 or $100,000 a year. It's a very tough business with a lot of out-of-pocket expenses. So let's say that their sales of $1 million, by allowing a 0.7% retention of the sales tax for that store, that allows that store to keep an additional $7,000. So that could increase the net profits for the small business owner from $50,000 to $57,000. It could increase their profits by 14%. Now, in a market economy, some of those benefits will also be felt by consumers. They would be essentially split between consumers and the store owners. So realistically, consumers might save 0.35%. And then the other 0.35% might go to the margins, depending on the competitive nature of a particular area. It could go more one way or the other. So that was one big one. The other one I just signed yesterday, and that was cutting the residential assessment rate from 7.2 to 7.15%. What I'd like to point out about this one is the legislature didn't need to do it. We showed different modeling, but they chose to do it because they know, Democrats and Republicans, that the high cost of housing and increased assessments is a burden to homeowners. Now, assessments have gone up in many different areas, but what this did is at least that residential assessment rate is going down. And we look forward, again, along with the savings from full-day kindergarten, along with hopeful savings on their HOA fees and other areas. We hope that Coloradans have a little bit more money left in their pocket at the end of every month to enjoy the great Colorado that we love.
Governor, to that specific point, do you support a change to Gallagher that would be more regional than a statewide? Because one of the folks on the Eastern Plains, one of the things they complain about most is that it's the folks in the Front Range who are the big beneficiaries of reduction in residential rates. The Eastern Plains isn't seeing that.
Yeah, we're open to discussions on Gallagher reform. It's part of the fiscal reform working group that Carrie Kennedy from our office is engaged with, and that was had several meetings at the governor's mansion, and Gallagher reform is one of those items being discussed to make sure that we have a policy that provides relief to homeowners on their taxes, but also has the flexibility necessary to reflect the realities of economies across the state. One of those proposed ideas would be regionalization. There are others as well.
Governor, since signing,
I was just going to say, do you see the next session as less ambitious in terms of an agenda and more implementation?
Well, a lot of the implementation is off session, right? So the bills have been passed, so whether it's reinsurance, prescription drug importation, hospital pricing transparency, full-day kindergarten, which is largely in the hands of school districts, these are happening as a executive or administrative function of government. It's certainly possible that on some of these there'll be additional tweaks or improvements that need to be made based on real-world learning. But in general, we plan to continue to try to save Coloradans money. We'll look forward to additional measures to save people money on health care, expanding access to early childhood education, saving people money on preschool, and continuing to work on tax reform.
since signing Senate Bill 101, or 181, you mentioned oil and gas earlier, 7 municipalities, localities have passed moratoriums on development for the time being. Do you support that move, or are you concerned about what local government is doing?
So 181 had no effect legally on the ability of local communities to have moratoriums. In the past decades, the courts have allowed short-term timeouts while communities engaged in rulemaking. There's nothing in 181 that would allow for a legal defense of a longer moratorium of several years. I think the communities are being thoughtful with their newfound formalization of their role in the siting of oil and gas activities. And again, there's nothing in 181 that affected the legal status of moratoriums one way or the other.
Senator Ray Scott has an op-ed today in the Federalist where he calls you an anti-energy extremist. What do you say to Ray Scott?
Well, that's just, it's my understanding that's a fairly fringe right-wing publication. The energy industry is thriving in our great state, and that means wind and solar and oil and gas and hydro. And we are a state that is, been a great vision of kind of, I think, the future of energy as we move to a cleaner, more renewable energy future. We have valuable resources in our land that we want to be responsible custodians of, and of course putting the health and safety of our residents first. So again, we have a thriving energy economy across all sectors in our great state, and depending on the commodity pricing in various areas, we fully expect that will continue.
Governor, what's your thoughts on, one of the bills that you signed yesterday was on conservation easements?
Mm-hmm.
And I was wondering what your thoughts are about reimbursing the taxpayers who have had their tax credits denied and lost control of their lands anyway. The cost estimates range from $50 to $100 million if you were to fully reimburse everybody. Are you in favor of reimbursing the taxpayers?
I have not seen any legislative proposals that would
You signed it yesterday.
that didn't reimburse the taxpayers.
But it set up a task force that's supposed to come up with how to do those
Mm-hmm.
reimbursements. So I'm just curious
Well, again, we'll look at any particular proposals when they come down, but it's premature to comment. The conservation easement program is again of great benefit to farmers and ranchers who are able to maintain the intergenerational integrity of their land by selling the easements, and of course the key element of that is the tax credits being transferable. So it has both a future of ag component, and as you know, our Commissioner of Ag and our whole focus in ag is about the future of ag and generational transition in farming and ranching. And of course, it also has a strong conservation piece around maintaining our open areas and historically farming and ranching areas in perpetuity.
Most of the people who lost those tax credits were farmers and ranchers, including our former Commissioner of Agriculture, Don Brown. So is your message to them to continue enrolling in this program?
It's an optional program. I mean, when farmers want to sell their easements, they can, and nobody's saying that they have to. So it's a fully optional program for people, and it's helped some farmers engage in intergenerational transfer of their farms and ranchers. It's helped preserve some of our great historic farms and ranches, and you know, it's entirely up. It's just a tool, and it's entirely up to the landowners if they choose to use it or not.
Governor, you had expressed a concern about the actuarial soundness of the original pay family relief bill. Now that you signed the study into law, is your administration going to be involved heavily in that task force, or are you going to step back, see what comes out of it, and then get back?
I expect that those appointments will be made in short order. They're appointed by both the minority and the majority in the House and Senate. I think we appoint one as well. And of course, the Colorado Department of Labor and Employment will help provide background information and data to that working group that will be composed and constituted shortly under the law that we signed. Thank you.